And Lucy is poor, and everyone finds out also that the proposal thing was some past promise when they were kids, kind of. And Edward's family is wealthy. So remember, Edward and Fanny, who is his sister, and Fanny is the wife of John, who's the sibling of Eleanor and Marianne. They're wealthy, and their last name is Ferris. The Ferrises are wealthy. Edward, to marry Lucy, a poor girl, is looked very badly by the Ferris. Edward's mother runs the estate. I don't remember if Edward's father is around or not, but he's not really an important character. Edward's mother is pretty mad about that her son would marry a poor girl, because I believe at the same time his mother had already picked a wife for him, another rich, a daughter of a rich family. I can't remember who. I think it might have been a Middleton. A Middleton is another rich family in the book. So for his mother to find out that Edward has chosen to marry this poor girl from a promise from when they were kids, she's mad, and she tells him that, no, you can't marry this person. If you do, I will write you out of the will. And he's, like I've said before, his character is one of honor. I think that's probably what he represents in the book, although he's, like I said, there's other poor qualities about him, like being kind of unconfident and all that. But he sticks to his promise and says, no, I will marry Lucy. And I'll read you what happens. There's a nice little part in the book here. Page 225 in my edition. So it begins off with just saying that we tried to convince Edward and he wouldn't do it. So this is, now I'm going to quote from the book. Duty, affection, everything was disregarded. So he disregarded all those things. I never thought Edward so stubborn, so unfeeling before. His mother explained to him her liberal designs in case of his marrying Miss Morton. That's the daughter that they were expecting him to marry. Told him she would settle on him the Norfolk estate, which, clear of land tax, brings in a good 1,000 a year. Offered even, when even matters grew desperate, to make it 1,200. So they're trying to convince Edward. It's like, okay, if you forget this Lucy girl, we'll give you the Norfolk estate. It gives you $1,000 a year. And no, he won't take that. Okay, 1,200. No, won't take that. In opposition to this, if he still persisted in this low connection, which is Lucy, represented to him the certain penury that must attend the match. His own £2,000, she protested, should be his all. So Edward already has $2,000, I guess. His mother says, that's all you're getting from me. You won't get any money from me. She would never see him again, and so far would she be from affording him the smallest assistance, that if he were to enter into any profession with a view of better support, she would do all in her power to prevent his advancing in it. So not only would she not talk to him anymore and excommunicate him, if he tried to arise in a profession such as a lawyer or a doctor, she would damage him. She would damage his reputation. So there is massive things at stake here for Edward. He is being destroyed by his family because he's chosen to be honorable to a promise he made in the past. So, very interesting for Edward that all this is happening to him. And of course, Eleanor knows this is occurring, and what is she to do? And there's nothing for her to do, so she just kind of lets it go, and there's nothing that she can do about it. And so the book now kind of continues as if, okay, Edward and Lucy are going to be together and they're going to be poor. Lucy doesn't have much money, and Edward's $2,000 will run out eventually. So what happens is Colonel Brandon kind of comes back in and says, I know a place where Edward, I guess Edward is going to be a priest for his profession. Colonel Brandon knows a location where Edward can take over an abbey, and the abbey comes with a small house, and they could live there. And I think it paid, I don't think I wrote it down. It's a chapel with a small income. I didn't write it down, the amount. But Colonel Brandon kind of lends a hand to the situation, which he's sensitive to. And interestingly enough, how the news of that proposal of giving Edward a chapel, if he wants to take it, which gives him some income, is Colonel Brandon sees Eleanor about it and asks Eleanor to tell him. So Eleanor kind of now has to see Edward again and tell him that, and it's kind of annoying, right, because of the feelings involved. I don't remember why. There's a reason, but I don't remember why Brandon asked Eleanor to tell him for him. But anyways, Eleanor does. At this point in the book, Marianne gets very ill. She is seen by doctors. She gets a fever, and she's bedridden for a little while. And eventually, they're in London, and eventually they send for her mother, which is out at the estate where they live, because they don't know whether she'll make it. She's sweating and all that, and it's pretty bad. And eventually, Marianne recovers, and there's a part I want to read from the book about that, because it's kind of interesting. Also, I should say that Jane Austen does a very good job here of creating a lot of suspense about Marianne's condition, because you don't really know what's going to happen to her. Eleanor is also essentially her nurse. Like, Eleanor stays in the room with her like hours and hours of the day, and peers over her. And so there's a part here, just a few sentences I want to read. She says, so this is page 262 at the bottom. To hope she could perceive a slight amendment in her sister's pulse, she waited, watched, and examined it again and again, and at last, with an agitation more difficult to bury under exterior calmness than all her foregoing distress, ventured to communicate her hopes. So she, a friend of the family came by and wanted to know how Marianne was doing. And Eleanor, that's kind of what Eleanor was going through. Also, at the bottom here, hope had already entered, and feeling all its anxious flutter, she bent over her sister to watch. She hardly knew for what. Half an hour passed away, and the favorable symptom yet blessed her. Others even arose to confirm it. Her breath, her skin, her lips all fluttered Eleanor with signs of amendment, and Marianne fixed her eyes on her with a rational, though languid gaze. So Marianne's getting better. And how does Eleanor take Marianne getting better? You would think you'd be overjoyed, right? This is how Marianne takes it. Eleanor could not be cheerful. Her joy was of a different kind and led to anything rather than to gaiety. Marianne, restored to life, health, friends, and to her doting mother, was an idea to fill her heart with sensations of exquisite comfort and expand it in fervent gratitude. But it led to no outward demonstrations of joy, no words, no smiles. All within Eleanor's breast was satisfaction, silent and strong. There's Eleanor. You wanted to quote Eleanor's character, how, at least more specifically, how she deals with emotions? Right there. That's page 263. Now, at this point in the book, it is, it's not you wouldn't expect what happens. So, a cart, so they've already sent for her mother and Colonel Brandon to come. and they hear Eleanor's upstairs with Marianne, and Eleanor hears a cart coming up the driveway, and she sees a man get out, and she thinks, is that Colonel Brandon? But he's really early. He shouldn't be here yet. So she comes downstairs, so I guess a servant opens the door. And she comes downstairs, and I want to read, because Jane Austen does this very well. Eleanor thinks that Colonel Brandon and her mother have arrived. And keep in mind, Colonel Brandon and her mother don't know Marianne's fate. All they've been told is by note, by letter, is that Marianne is very ill and may be dying, so please come and see her. So Eleanor, now that Eleanor knows that Marianne's getting better, she's very anxious to tell them that Marianne's doing better. So now I'll read, this is from page 264. Never in her life had Eleanor found it so difficult to be calm as at that moment. The knowledge of what her mother must be feeling as the carriage stopped at the door, of her doubt, her dread, perhaps her despair, and of what she had to tell. With such knowledge it was impossible to be calm. All that remained to be done was to be speedy, and therefore staying only till she could leave Mrs. Jennings' maid with her sister, she hurried downstairs. So they're at Mrs. Jennings' place. I think this is in London, England. And so Eleanor, of course, doesn't like leaving Marianne alone. So before she can leave the room, she gets the maid to stay in there with Marianne. Like that, I don't know, that's just Eleanor. So then she rushes downstairs. The bustle in the vestibule, as she passed along an inner lobby, assured her that they were already in the house. She rushed forward towards the drawing room. She entered it and saw only Willoughby. Perfect. What a perfect point of the book. Not expecting it, and yet Willoughby, and yet everyone hates Willoughby, and yet you wonder, why is he back? So very well done part of the book for Jane Austen. Okay, so Willoughby, Eleanor is mad at Willoughby, not only because it's Willoughby, but also because her sister's upstairs dying, and Eleanor doesn't care about Willoughby, wants him to go away. So Eleanor is very reluctant to even let him in, wants him to leave, and Willoughby this whole time wants Eleanor to grant him an audience to let him speak to her, because Willoughby has heard about Marianne and is concerned for Marianne. So this part of the book has a long conversations between Eleanor and Willoughby, and is essentially Willoughby starts to give his account, to give his side of the relationship. So now I'm going to just use a few quotes from the book here, a few kind of essences or essentials that come out of the long conversation that Eleanor and Willoughby have, to give kind of Willoughby's story. This is that's the purpose of this section. And so this is from page 268. Willoughby says that, I did not know the extent of the injury I meditated, because I did not know then what it was to love. So there's one point. And then he says, right almost next to it, for had I really loved, could I have sacrificed my feelings to vanity, to avarice, or what is more, could I have sacrificed hers? So essentially what he's saying is, if I knew what I was doing, if I really understood the love in the relationship, would I have thrown it all away? So he's trying to appeal to Eleanor that that Willoughby is not this evil character who knew exactly what he was doing, who intended all this damage, who intended to give Marianne a ride and then leave, he's trying to tell Eleanor that he himself was unaware of the situation, was perhaps juvenile in his treatment of the situation, was not mature, and yeah. Okay. And here's a nice little part too, again, that Willoughby's trying to say, look, I'm not this evil guy. So this is on page 269. He says, so Eleanor says, like, Marianne tells me all these bad things about you. Like why should I believe anything you say? And he says pretty much, well, look at the source of the knowledge you're getting from. Marianne is obviously pissed off at me, so of course she's going to say bad things about me. And then he says, because I was a libertine, she must be a saint. So he's essentially saying that, yeah, she has no onus in this. I must be the big evil guy, the selfish evil guy, and of course she's the helpless young woman who is not at all blamable. And Eleanor is not giving in to everything here, but she is being convinced. And Eleanor says here on the same page, do not think yourself excused by any weakness, any natural defect of understanding on her side, in the wanton cruelty so evident on yours. So this is a bit of a pushback. Eleanor is saying, well, okay, maybe, but you are still a bad man compared to Marianne. That's all that she's saying there. Here's another part that Willoughby says, which is kind of strange. He says, this is on page 271. Miss Dashwood, you cannot have an idea of the comfort it gives me to look back on my own misery. I owe such a grudge to myself for the stupid, rascally folly of my own heart that all my past sufferings under it are only triumph and exaltation to me now. Well, I went and left all that I loved, and went to those to whom at best I was only indifferent. So I think at this point, Willoughby tells Eleanor that he's had to go and marry somebody else that he doesn't really like because of a past debts he has with that lady's mother. And he gives this story to Eleanor that his situation is not very good, and he was kind of forced into it. And so here's a quote that says that. Page 273, he says, if you can pity me, Miss Dashwood, pity my situation as it was then. With my head and heart full of your sister, I was forced to play the happy lover to another woman. So there it is right there. Here's a nice little part. Kind of has an illusion here, probably a piece that you'd want to write something on if you had to. This is on the same page. He says, I ran away from you all as soon as I could, but not before I had seen Marianne's sweet face as white as death. So he's talking about the party that they were at, that Willoughby attended, and it was a very cold relation there, cold meeting. That was the last look I ever had of her, the last moment in which she appeared to me. It was a horrid sight, yet when I thought of her today as really dying, it was a kind of comfort to me to imagine that I knew exactly how she would appear to those who saw her last in this world. She was before me, constantly before me, as I traveled in the same look and hue. It's interesting for Jane Austen to say white as death, because often white is supposed to be heavenly, and blackness or dark is supposed to be death. At the same time, though, you've got, what was it, Walt Whitman, the poem about the winter? And I guess it's pretty common illusion that winter and snow are also the end of the seasons or death. So white as death, I guess by white they might they might be talking about the powder they would put on their faces, and so I guess at this little piece you'd have to maybe analyze, but to me it's talking about that at that point their relation was dead, and for Willoughby to return, that last image of Marianne's face as kind of devastated of Willoughby leaving her, that hasn't changed, and that Willoughby in some strange way was comforted that if Marianne were to die, then she would have died in that state. I don't know if that, maybe there's other ways you can read it, but essentially that Willoughby wasn't missing anything, that how she looked to him when they were together is how she will look when she dies. I don't know. I guess you could read that different ways, but that's just one way. And also there's a few parts in here where some of the letters the one letter that I read in this video of the kind of the devastating breakup letter, actually what happened was Willoughby was dictated the letter by his wife, or by, I think, I don't know if they're married, but they might as well be married. That letter was dictated, and Willoughby decided to write it. And so, including the lock of the hair, I guess his wife found the letters and the lock of hair and knew the situation. And so she had him destroy her in that way. So, interesting, you hear sometimes about a woman's scorn for, and usually that's referring to a woman being angry with a man that had broken up with her or whatever. But you don't hear as much about a woman's scorn for other women.